The day I almost died started with a craving for ice cream. I remember standing in the frozen foods aisle, debating between mint chocolate chip and Rocky Road when the first gunshot rang out. The sound was so unexpected, so out of place, that my brain didn't process it at first. I thought maybe a shelf had collapsed or something had exploded in the deli. But then came the screams. Suddenly, the fluorescent-lit normalcy of my Tuesday afternoon grocery run shattered. A man's voice boomed through the store. "Everybody down, this is a robbery." My heart leapt into my throat. I dropped to the cold linoleum floor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely brace myself. The carton of ice cream I'd been holding skittered away, leaving a trail of condensation. More gunshots, more screams, the sound of running feet. I said, "Down! Anyone who moves gets a bullet." I pressed my cheek against the floor, trying to make myself as small as possible. The chill of the freezer aisle seeped into my bones, but I barely noticed. All I could focus on was the thundering of my pulse in my ears and the ragged sound of my own breathing. Footsteps approached, heavy, purposeful strides. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if not seeing the danger might somehow protect me from it. "You! Up! Take us to the safe! Now!" I risked opening my eyes a crack. A pair of scuffed work boots stood inches from my face. Following them up, I saw dark jeans, a black sweatshirt, and a ski mask. In the man's gloved hand was a pistol, its muzzle pointing at the terrified face of a store employee. The worker, his name tag read, Mike, slowly got to his feet, hands raised. Please," he stammered, I don't have access to the... The gunman backhanded Mike across the face with the pistol. The crack of metal on flesh made me flinch. "I don't want excuses. Take us to whoever does have access. Move!" Mike stumbled forward, blood trickling from his split lip. The gunman grabbed him by the collar and shoved him down the aisle. As they passed, I caught a glimpse of wild, desperate eyes behind the ski mask. This wasn't a professional criminal. This was someone unhinged, unpredictable. That scared me more than anything. I don't know how long I lay there, my body rigid with fear. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. I could hear muffled sobs from other shoppers, hushed whispers, the squeak of a child's shoe quickly shushed by a parent. Then came the wail of police sirens in the distance. "Shit!" The curse echoed through the store. "You said we had more time, A different voice answered, higher pitched and panicky. I thought we did. The silent alarm must have... Shut up. Just shut up and think." The sirens grew louder. I heard the gunmen arguing in furious whispers, their words indistinct but their tone frantic. My hopes surged. Maybe this would be over soon. Maybe the police would storm in and save us all. But then I remembered those desperate eyes, and I knew this was far from over. "Listen up." The first gunman's voice rang out again. "Everyone in the produce section now, move it." For a moment, no one moved. Then came the sound of a gunshot, followed by the tinkling of broken glass. That was a warning. Next one goes in someone's head if you don't move. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. My legs felt like jelly, barely able to support my weight. I shuffled towards produce, joining a stream of shell-shocked shoppers. An elderly woman stumbled, and I caught her arm to steady her. Her eyes met mine, filled with a terror that I'm sure mirrored my own. In the produce section, we were herded into a tight group. I found myself crushed between the elderly woman and a teenage boy who couldn't stop shaking. The smell of fear, sweat, and adrenaline was overpowering. There were two gunmen. The one who'd been shouting orders was tall and broad-shouldered. The other was smaller, twitchy, his gun hand trembling. They conferred in hushed tones, gesturing wildly. A baby started crying somewhere in the crowd. The sound seemed to snap the smaller gunman's already frayed nerves. "Shut that kid up!" he yelled, waving his gun at the crowd. A young mother clutched her infant tighter, trying to soothe it, but the baby, picking up on its mother's fear, only wailed louder. The gunman strode forward, pushing people aside. "I said shut it up!" "Please," the mother sobbed. "He's just a baby. He doesn't understand." The gunman raised his weapon. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his finger tightening on the trigger. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Wait!" I shouted. All eyes turned to me, including the wild, terrified gaze of the gunman. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sandpaper. I I can help. I'm a nurse. Maybe the baby's hurt or sick. Let me check. It was a lie. I wasn't a nurse. I worked in IT, for God's sake. But I had to do something, anything, to defuse the situation. The gunman's eyes narrowed. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to shoot me instead. Then he jerked his head towards the mother. Fine, do it. But any funny business. He didn't need to finish the threat. I nodded and slowly approached the mother. Up close, I could see she was barely more than a girl herself, probably no older than 20. Tears streaked her face as she looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "It's okay," I murmured, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "May I?" She nodded, loosening her grip on the baby. I gently took the infant, noting with relief that he seemed unharmed, just frightened. I began to rock him, humming softly, a lullaby my own mother used to sing. To my amazement, it worked. The baby's cries softened to whimpers, then ceased altogether. The tension in the air eased just a fraction. "There," I said, handing the now quiet baby back to his mother. "He's fine, just scared like the rest of us." The smaller gunman backed away, his weapon lowering slightly. I allowed myself a small breath of relief, but it was short-lived. Outside, a voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the police. We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up." The larger gunman cursed, then grabbed me roughly by the arm. "You, nurse, you're coming with us." He dragged me towards the front of the store, the other gunman following. As we passed the checkouts, I saw Mike, the employee from earlier, slumped behind a register. Blood matted his hair, but I could see his chest rising and falling. Still alive, thank God. We reached the entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see a sea of flashing lights. Police cars formed a barricade. Officers crouched behind them, weapons drawn. The gunman pushed me in front of him, using me as a human shield. I felt the cold press of the gun barrel against my temple. "Listen up, cops," he shouted. "We've got hostages in here. You try anything, and we start shooting." The voice on the megaphone responded, "We want to resolve this peacefully. Tell us what you want." What followed was a blur of demands and negotiations. The gunmen wanted a car, money, safe passage. The police stalled, trying to talk them down. All the while I stood there, the gun never leaving my head, certain that any moment could be my last. I thought about my family, my parents, who I'd been meaning to call but kept putting off. My sister, whose wedding I was supposed to attend next month. Would I ever see them again? The regret of all the things left unsaid, all the moments I'd taken for granted, threatened to overwhelm me. Hours passed. The gunmen grew more agitated. Sweat soaked through their masks. Their hands shook with fatigue and frayed nerves. I knew we were reaching a breaking point. That's when I heard it. A faint sound from behind us. The whisper of movement. The gunmen were so focused on the police outside that they didn't notice. But I realized what was happening. While we'd been distracted at the front, police had managed to enter through the back. I had to keep the gunman's attention forward. "Please," I said, my voice cracking. "I need to use the bathroom." The larger gunman snarled, "Shut up. You think I care about—" That moment of distraction was all it took. There was a loud bang and a flash of light. A smoke grenade. Chaos erupted. I felt the gun leave my head as the gunman staggered back. Without thinking, I dropped to the ground and rolled away. Shouts, gunshots, the sound of breaking glass. I curled into a ball, hands over my head, praying I wouldn't catch a stray bullet. The acrid smoke burned my eyes and throat. And then suddenly, it was over. Strong hands grabbed me, pulling me to my feet. Through the haze, I saw police officers swarming the store. The gunmen were on the ground, subdued. "Are you all right?" A paramedic was asking me questions, checking me for injuries, but I barely heard him. The adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly drained away, leaving me lightheaded and weak. As they led me outside, past the police barricade where my fellow hostages were being treated and questioned, a thought struck me. That craving for ice cream, such a small, insignificant thing, had nearly cost me my life. But it had also shown me how precious that life was, how quickly everything could change. I vowed then, as the evening sun hit my face and I took my first deep breath of free air, that I would never again take a single moment for granted, and I really, really wanted that ice cream. The day my world shattered began with a simple trip to buy Goldfish crackers. I remember the weight of my purse on my shoulder, the squeak of the shopping cart's wheel, and the warmth of my daughter's small hand in mine as we entered the supermarket. Lily, my precocious 4-year-old, was chattering about the picture she'd drawn at preschool. I nodded along, only half listening as I mentally ran through our grocery list. "Can I ride in the cart, Mommy?" Lily asked, her big brown eyes pleading. I hesitated. She was getting a bit big for that, but it would make shopping easier. "Okay, sweetie, up you go." I lifted her into the seat, making sure she was secure before heading towards the snack aisle. Lily's legs swung happily as she pointed out colorful displays and interesting products. I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. We turned down the cereal aisle and I paused to compare prices on granola. That's when I heard it, the sound that would haunt my nightmares for months to come. "Ooh, Mommy, look at the pretty balloons." I turned, a gentle reprimand on my lips about not interrupting, but the words died in my throat. The cart was empty, Lily was gone. For a moment I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My brain refused to accept the reality before me. I blinked hard, expecting Lily to magically reappear. She didn't. "Lily..." My voice came out as a strangled whisper. I spun around, scanning the aisle. "Lily..." No answer, just the mundane sounds of the supermarket. Distant beeps from the checkout. The hum of freezers, Muzak playing softly overhead. How could everything sound so normal when my world was collapsing? "Lily." I screamed her name now, not caring about the startled looks from other shoppers. I abandoned the cart, racing up and down the aisle. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. She had to be here. She had to be. But she wasn't. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to choke me. I ran to the end of the aisle, looking both ways. The store suddenly seemed massive, a labyrinth of endless shelves and countless hiding spots. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" A concerned employee approached me, but I barely registered his presence. "My daughter," I gasped, struggling to form coherent thoughts. "She's gone. She was just here in the cart, and now she's gone." The employee's eyes widened. He reached for his walkie-talkie, speaking rapidly into it. I heard phrases like "Code Adam" and "4-year-old girl," but they seemed to come from very far away. More employees appeared, asking questions I could barely focus on. What was Lily wearing? How tall was she? What color was her hair? I answered mechanically, my eyes constantly scanning, searching for a glimpse of her yellow sundress or the glint of her dark curls. How could I have let this happen? I was supposed to protect her. I was her mother, for God's sake. An announcement crackled over the store's PA system, describing Lily and asking anyone who had seen her to come to the customer service desk. The exits were sealed, they assured me. No one was leaving the store. But what if she was already gone? The thought hit me like a physical blow, nearly bringing me to my knees. I'd heard the horror stories, children disappearing in the blink of an eye, never to be seen again. I'd always thought naively that it could never happen to me. I was too careful, too vigilant. Yet here I was, living every parent's worst nightmare. Time seemed to warp and stretch. Had it been minutes since Lily disappeared? Hours? I couldn't tell. I paced the store, calling her name until my voice grew hoarse. Every flash of yellow made my heart leap, only to crash back down when it wasn't her. Customers joined the search, kind faces offering reassurances that we'd find her, but I could see the pity in their eyes, the unspoken fear. What if we didn't? I found myself in the toy aisle, surrounded by dolls and stuffed animals. Lily loved this aisle. We'd spend ages here, her imagination spinning wild stories about each toy. Now the cheerful displays seemed to mock me. That's when I saw it, a small stuffed elephant, nearly hidden behind some board games. Lily had one just like it at home, her constant bedtime companion. I reached for it with trembling hands, clutching it to my chest. The soft fur against my cheek unleashed the tears I'd been holding back. They came in great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. "Please, I whispered to no one in particular. Please, bring her back to me. Mommy? For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, a cruel trick of my desperate mind. But then I heard it again, louder this time. Mommy! I whirled around. There, at the end of the aisle, was Lily. Her yellow dress was rumpled, her face tear-stained, but she was alive. She was safe. I ran to her, scooping her up in my arms and holding her so tightly she squirmed. Lily! Oh God, Lily! Where were you? Are you okay? She nodded against my shoulder. I saw the balloons, Mommy. I wanted to look at them, but then I couldn't find you. Her lower lip trembled. I was scared. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. I peppered her face with kisses, breathing in her familiar scent of baby shampoo and fruit snacks. Store employees rushed over, alerted by our reunion. They radioed to call off the search, smiles of relief on their faces. Customers who had been helping looked on, some wiping away tears of their own. As the adrenaline faded, my legs felt weak. I sank to the floor, still clutching Lily to me. A kind-faced older woman brought over a bottle of water, which I accepted gratefully. You gave us quite a scare, young lady, a security guard said to Lily, his stern tone belied by the twinkle in his eye. Lily ducked her head shyly. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. See that you don't, he replied, then turned to me. Ma'am, if you're feeling up to it, we'd like to review our security footage. It might help us improve our response for situations like these. I nodded, though the thought of reliving those terrifying moments made my stomach churn. Of course, just give me a minute. He nodded understandingly and stepped away to give us some privacy. I looked at Lily, really looked at her. Her big brown eyes, still a little red from crying, the smattering of freckles across her nose, the way her curls always seemed to defy gravity. Details I knew by heart but now saw with new appreciation. Lily, I said softly, cupping her face in my hands. You must never, ever wander off like that again. Do you understand? She nodded solemnly. I promise, Mommy. Good. I hugged her close again, marveling at how someone so small could hold my entire world. I love you so much, sweetie. So much. I love you too, Mommy, she mumbled into my shirt. Then after a pause, can we still get goldfish crackers? A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, bordering on hysterical. Yes, baby, we can get goldfish crackers. As we made our way to the customer service desk, Lily's hand firmly in mine, I couldn't shake the lingering tendrils of fear. The what-ifs played on a loop in my mind. What if she'd been taken? What if we hadn't found her? But each time those dark thoughts threatened to overwhelm me, I squeezed Lily's hand. The warm pressure of her tiny fingers in mine anchored me to the present. She was here. She was safe. The security office was small and cluttered, walls lined with monitors showing different areas of the store. The head of security, a balding man with kind eyes, greeted us. Mrs. Johnson, we're so glad this had a happy ending, he said, gesturing for us to sit. We've pulled the relevant footage. Are you ready to view it? I wasn't, not really. But I nodded anyway. The footage was grainy but clear enough. I watched as past me turned to examine the granola. Lily, seizing her chance, clambered out of the cart with surprising agility. She toddled off, disappearing from the frame in seconds. My throat tightened as I watched myself realize she was missing. The panic on my face was painful to see. Here's where she went, the security guard said, switching to a different camera. Lily appeared again, wandering into the party supplies aisle. Her face lit up at the sight of helium balloons tied to a display. She reached for one, but the movement sent the entire bunch bobbing just out of reach. Mesmerized, she followed the balloons as they drifted down the aisle, carried by the store's air conditioning. Soon, she was in a completely different section of the store. That's when she seemed to realize she was lost. The camera caught her lip wobbling, tears starting to fall. She called out. For me, I assumed, but of course the footage was silent. A lump formed in my throat as I watched my little girl wander the store, growing increasingly distressed. Store employees passed by, but in the busy supermarket, a crying child didn't immediately raise alarms. Finally, Lily found her way to the toy aisle. She curled up in a corner, clutching a stuffed elephant, the same one I'd found. That's where she'd been when I finally heard her calling for me. The footage ended, and I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Mrs. Johnson," the security guard said gently, "I know this was difficult to watch, but I want you to know, you did everything right. You alerted us immediately, which allowed us to lock down the store. Your quick action kept your daughter safe." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Lily, who had been unusually quiet, climbed into my lap. "I'm sorry I scared you, Mommy," she whispered. I hugged her close, breathing in her familiar scent. "I know, baby. I'm just so glad you're okay." As we left the office, the enormity of what had happened, and what could have happened, hit me anew. I'd always considered myself a careful parent. I'd baby-proofed our home, taught Lily about stranger danger, always kept a close eye on her at the park, but it had only taken a moment, one moment of distraction, for everything to go wrong. The rest of our shopping trip was a blur. I held Lily's hand the entire time, probably too tightly, but she didn't complain. We got her goldfish crackers and I threw in a small toy as well. A reward for being brave, I told her, but really, it was for me. A tangible reminder that she was here, she was safe. That night, after Lily was asleep, in my bed, I couldn't bear to have her out of my sight. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the normal detritus of our life. Lily's drawings on the fridge, her toys scattered across the floor, photos of her gap-toothed grin on the walls. I thought about how close I'd come to losing all of this, how one moment of inattention could have changed everything. But we'd been lucky. Lily was safe, sleeping peacefully upstairs, and I had been given a stark reminder of how precious and fragile this life we'd built was. Tomorrow, I'd look into child GPS trackers. I'd reinforce our talks about staying close in public. I'd probably be a little more helicopterish for a while, much to Lily's frustration. But tonight, I simply sat in the quiet of our home, listening to the soft sounds of my daughter's breathing over the baby monitor, and felt profound gratitude for second chances. I never thought darkness could have a sound, but in that moment, I swear I heard it swallow us whole. It was a typical Friday evening at Meadowbrook Supermarket. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, shopping carts squeaked along the polished floors, and the tinny sound of soft rock drifted from hidden speakers. I was in the produce section, debating between romaine and iceberg lettuce for dinner when it happened. One second, I was squinting at nutrition labels. The next, I was plunged into absolute darkness. The change was so sudden, so complete, that for a moment I thought I'd gone blind. I blinked rapidly, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but the darkness remained impenetrable. The background noise of the store cut out abruptly, replaced by a chorus of surprised gasps and nervous laughter. "Everyone stay calm," a voice called out, probably a store employee. "I'm sure the power will be back on in a moment," but it wasn't. Seconds stretched into minutes, and the initial amusement began to fade, replaced by a growing undercurrent of unease. I could hear people shuffling around, the rustle of clothing and the occasional bump, followed by muttered apologies. I remained rooted to the spot, afraid of crashing into a display if I moved. My hands gripped the shopping cart handle tightly, using it as an anchor in the sea of blackness. "Hello?" I called out tentatively. "Is anyone there?" "I'm here," a voice responded from my left, startlingly close. I flinched involuntarily. "Sorry," the voice continued, softer this time. "Didn't mean to scare you. I'm Mark. I was looking at tomatoes when the lights went out." "Sarah," I replied, grateful for the human connection. "Any idea what's going on?" "Not a clue," Mark said, "but I can't get any signal on my phone." "You—" I fumbled in my purse for my phone, nearly dropping it in my haste. The screen lit up, casting a feeble glow that barely penetrated the darkness. "No signal here either," I confirmed, a tendril of worry curling in my stomach. More voices joined our conversation, other shoppers trapped in produce. We introduced ourselves by disembodied voices: elderly Mrs. Chen, who'd been examining cantaloupes; college student Zach, who'd only popped in for energy drinks; young mom Alicia with her toddler Jamie. "Shouldn't there be emergency lights or something?" Zach asked, a note of frustration in his voice. As if on cue, a few dim red emergency lights flickered to life. They provided just enough illumination to make out vague shapes and shadows, but did little to dispel the oppressive darkness. If anything, the eerie red glow made everything feel more ominous. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from somewhere near the front of the store, a high-pitched shriek of terror that made my blood run cold. It was quickly followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. "What's happening?" Alicia's voice trembled as she spoke. I heard Jamie start to whimper. Before anyone could respond, another voice boomed through the store. "Nobody move. This is a robbery." My heart, already racing, now threatened to burst from my chest. A robbery. In this chaos? "Everyone on the ground now, the voice commanded. "If I see anyone standing, I start shooting. I lowered myself to the cold tile floor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control my movements. Around me, I heard the others doing the same. Jamie started crying in earnest now, and I heard Alicia desperately trying to shush him. "Please," Mrs. Chen's quavering voice came from nearby. "I have a bad hip. I can't," I said on the ground. The voice was closer now, menacing. There was a thud and a cry of pain. "Mrs. Chen." "Hey," Mark's voice rang out. "Leave her alone. She's just an old lady." The sound of running footsteps, a scuffle, a grunt of pain that I was pretty sure came from Mark. "Anyone else want to be a hero?" the robber snarled. Silence fell, broken only by muffled sobs and the sound of heavy breathing. My mind raced. How many robbers were there? What did they want? How had they managed to cut the power and cell signals? Were the police on their way? I tried to control my breathing, to think rationally. Surely someone outside must have noticed the power outage. Help had to be coming. We just had to stay calm and wait it out. But as minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, my optimism began to fade. I could hear the robbers moving through the store, their footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. Occasionally there would be the sound of breaking glass or a muffled cry, followed by harsh commands to "shut up." I lost track of time. My body ached from lying on the hard floor, but I didn't dare move. The darkness pressed in on all sides, amplifying every sound, every sensation. I could hear Alicia softly singing to Jamie, her voice barely above a whisper. Zach was muttering under his breath, a steady stream of, "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Suddenly, a new sound cut through the darkness. Sirens, faint but growing louder. "Shit!" one of the robbers cursed. "How the hell did they know?" "We gotta get out of here, man," another voice, higher pitched and panicky. "Shut up," the first voice snapped. Just grab what you can. We're leaving in 2 minutes." The next moments were a blur of frantic activity. I could hear the robbers running back and forth, shouting at each other. Something heavy crashed to the floor nearby, making me flinch. Then, without warning, the lights flickered back to life. The sudden brightness was almost painful. I squinted, trying to adjust, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fear. As my vision cleared, I saw that I wasn't the only one looking around in confusion. The produce section was a mess. Fruits and vegetables were scattered across the floor, displays overturned. A few aisles over, I could see broken bottles and spilled liquids, and people, dozens of people, slowly sitting up looking shell-shocked. That's when I saw them. 2 men in black hoodies, their faces obscured by ski masks, standing near the front of the store. They were surrounded by duffel bags, presumably filled with their loot. For a moment they stood frozen, caught in the sudden light like deer in headlights. Then chaos erupted. People started screaming and running. The robbers, panicked, started shoving their way through the crowd towards the exit. I saw one of them raise his gun and my heart stopped. But before he could fire, something extraordinary happened. Mark, brave, foolish Mark, launched himself at the gunman. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun skittering across the floor. The other robber hesitated for a split second, torn between helping his partner and making a run for it. That moment of indecision was all it took. Zach and another man I didn't recognize tackled him from behind. It was over in moments. Store security and the first responding officers burst through the doors, quickly taking control of the situation. The robbers were handcuffed and led away, looking far less intimidating in the harsh fluorescent light. As the adrenaline faded, I became aware of my surroundings again. Paramedics were tending to Mrs. Chen and others who had been hurt. Alicia was hugging Jamie tightly, both of them crying but safe. Mark was being checked over by a medic, a bruise blooming on his cheek but a grin on his face. A police officer approached me, notepad in hand. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can you tell me what happened, Bo?" I opened my mouth to respond, but found I didn't know where to begin. How could I possibly describe the terror of those endless minutes in the dark, the helplessness, the fear, the wild swing between despair and hope? "It's okay," the officer said gently, seeming to understand. "Take your time. You're safe now." Safe. The word echoed in my mind. Yes, we were safe. We had survived. As I gave my statement to the officer, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly normalcy had reasserted itself. The lights were on, the mess was being cleaned up, and already some shoppers were tentatively returning to their carts, determined to finish their errands. But I knew that for me, and probably for many others here, things would never be quite the same. We had stared into the darkness, literal and figurative, and come out the other side. We had seen both the worst and the best of humanity in the span of less than an hour. I thought of Mark's bravery, of Alicia's quiet strength as she comforted her child, of the strangers who had come together to overpower the robbers. In the face of danger, ordinary people had become heroes. As I finally made my way out of the store, my abandoned cart of groceries long forgotten, I blinked in the fading evening light. The world seemed different somehow, brighter, more vivid. Or maybe it was me who had changed. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. In that moment, I made a silent vow to myself, to never take the light for granted again, to find the courage to stand up against darkness, in whatever form it might take, and to remember that even in the blackest night, hope and humanity can shine through. With one last look at the supermarket, a place forever transformed in my memory, I turned and walked towards home, leaving the darkness behind. The day I learned to fear free samples began like any other Saturday morning at Greenvale Supermarket. I remember the cheerful ping of the automatic doors as I entered, the squeak of my shopping cart's wheel, and the enticing aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from the bakery section. It was a bustling morning with families doing their weekly shopping and the occasional announcement crackling over the PA system. As I navigated through the produce section, expertly dodging fellow shoppers and their carts, I noticed a small crowd gathering near the deli counter. Curiosity piqued, I steered my cart in that direction. "Free samples," a chipper voice called out. "Try our new gourmet cheese spread." The voice belonged to a young woman in a crisp white apron, her blonde hair neatly tucked under a hairnet. She stood behind a small table laden with crackers and a creamy white spread. Her smile was bright as she handed out samples on little plastic spoons. I'm not usually one for free samples. Something about eating in the middle of a store always felt a bit off to me. But the spread looked tempting, and the woman's enthusiasm was infectious. Before I knew it, I found myself reaching for a sample. "You'll love it," the woman assured me. "It's our new garlic and herb blend." I popped the sample into my mouth, savoring the creamy texture and the burst of flavors. It was delicious, I had to admit. I even considered adding a container to my cart. That's when I heard the first cough. It came from somewhere behind me, a harsh, hacking sound that made me wince. I turned to see an elderly man hunched over his cart, his face reddening as he struggled to catch his breath. "Are you all right, sir?" I asked, moving towards him. He waved me off, still coughing. "Fine," he managed to wheeze. "Just went down the wrong pipe." I wasn't convinced, but before I could press further, another cough rang out, and another. Suddenly, the air was filled with the sounds of people coughing and gasping. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when I saw her. A young mother, her face pale and sweating, leaning heavily against a display of canned goods. In her arms, a toddler whimpered, his chubby cheeks flushed an alarming shade of red. "Help!" the woman croaked, her eyes wide with fear. "Something's wrong!" I rushed to her side, my own cart forgotten. As I reached her, her knees buckled. I managed to catch her and the child as they slumped to the floor. "Someone call an ambulance!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. The supermarket had erupted into chaos. People were coughing, retching, some even collapsing where they stood. The sound of breaking glass punctuated the air as items slipped from trembling hands. A man in a store uniform, the manager, I assumed, ran past, his face ashen. "What's happening?" I called out to him. He skidded to a stop, his eyes wild. "I don't know," he panted. "It's everywhere. People are getting sick all over the store." My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Then it hit me. The cheese spread, the free samples. I'd eaten one and I felt fine, but... "The samples," I gasped. "It has to be the samples." The manager's eyes widened in realization. He sprinted towards the deli counter, shouting for people to stop eating the samples. But it was too late. The damage was done. I stayed with the young mother and her child, trying to keep them calm as we waited for help. The little boy's breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle that made my own chest tighten in sympathy. "It's okay," I murmured, as much to myself as to them. "Help is coming. Just hang on." The minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. The sounds of suffering surrounded us, coughs, groans, the clatter of falling objects. Somewhere in the distance I could hear sirens approaching. Finally, paramedics burst through the doors, their faces grim as they took in the scene. They moved quickly, triaging patients and administering care. I waved frantically, directing them to the mother and child. As they were whisked away on stretchers, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going began to ebb, and I realized I was shaking. A paramedic approached me, concern etched on his face. "Ma'am, did you eat any of the samples?" I nodded, suddenly aware of a strange tingling sensation in my throat. "Yes, but I feel fine, I think." He frowned, reaching for my wrist to check my pulse. "Your heart rate is elevated. We should get you checked out, just to be safe." As he led me towards the exit, I caught a glimpse of the sample table. It was deserted now, the cheerful display a stark contrast to the chaos around it. The woman who had been handing out samples was nowhere to be seen. Outside, the parking lot had been transformed into a makeshift triage center. Ambulances lined the curb, their lights casting eerie red and blue shadows. People were being loaded into the backs of the vehicles, oxygen masks strapped to their faces. I was guided to a waiting area where a nurse took my vitals and asked me questions. How much had I eaten? When? Was I experiencing any symptoms? As I answered, I couldn't shake the feeling of unreality. How had a routine grocery trip turned into this nightmare? Hours passed in a blur of tests and observations. By some miracle, I seemed to have escaped the worst of it. The doctors theorized that I might have gotten a sample from a less contaminated batch, or that my body had simply reacted differently to whatever had caused the outbreak. It was late evening by the time I was cleared to go home. As I stepped out of the hospital, I was greeted by a swarm of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in my face. "Can you tell us what happened in the supermarket? How many people were affected? Do you know what caused the outbreak?" I pushed past them, muttering, "No comment," as I hurried to my car. My head was spinning, overwhelmed by the day's events. It wasn't until I got home, sinking into my familiar couch, that the full weight of what had happened hit me. I turned on the TV, seeking answers. The news was grim. Over 100 people had been hospitalized. Some were in critical condition. The outbreak had been traced to a batch of contaminated cheese used in the samples. Authorities were investigating how it had made it past quality control. As I watched the report, my phone buzzed with messages. Friends and family who had heard the news were checking in, making sure I was okay. I responded mechanically, assuring them I was fine, even though I felt anything but. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those who had fallen ill. The young mother and her child. The elderly man who had been the first to cough. How were they doing? Had they all made it? Days passed and slowly the story began to unfold. The contamination had been traced to a batch of unpasteurized milk used in the cheese production. Someone had cut corners, skipped safety protocols, all for the sake of a few dollars saved. The supermarket chain issued apology after apology. There were promises of increased safety measures, of compensation for those affected. But for many, it was too little, too late. I found myself unable to set foot in a supermarket for weeks after the incident. The thought of those cheerful sample tables, once so innocuous, now filled me with dread. When I finally mustered the courage to go grocery shopping again, I gave the deli counter a wide berth, my heart racing at the mere sight of it. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly returned to normal for most people. The incident became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of food safety regulations. For me, though, it was a turning point. I became hyper-aware of what I put into my body. I researched food production methods, learned about safety standards and regulations. I started shopping at local farmers markets, where I could talk directly to the people who grew and made my food. But more than that, the incident changed how I viewed the world around me. I realized how fragile our sense of safety really is, how quickly normalcy can be shattered. A simple trip to the supermarket, something I had done countless times without a second thought, had turned into a life-altering event. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, I also saw humanity at its best. I remembered the strangers who had helped each other in the chaos of the supermarket, the tireless medical staff who had worked around the clock to treat the affected, the investigators who had worked to uncover the truth and prevent future incidents. It was a harsh reminder of how interconnected we all are, how our actions or inactions can have far-reaching consequences. One person's negligence had affected hundreds of lives, but equally, one person's kindness could make a world of difference in a moment of crisis. Now, when I see a free sample stand at a store, I no longer see just a marketing tactic. I see a symbol of trust. Trust in the safety of our food, in the systems meant to protect us, in the people around us. It's a trust that was shaken that day in Greenvale Supermarket, but one that I've slowly learned to rebuild. And as for cheese spreads, well, let's just say I prefer to make my own these days. I never thought I'd become a hostage in my local supermarket. But then again, I never thought I'd see the day when organic kale could be used as a bargaining chip. It was supposed to be a quick run for dinner ingredients. My wife had texted me a last-minute request for arugula and goat cheese, essential components of her famous summer salad. So there I was, at 5:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, navigating the aisles of Greenleaf Market, our neighborhood's trendy organic supermarket. I remember the soft jazz playing over the speakers, the earthy smell of fresh produce, and the gentle hum of after-work shoppers filling their baskets. Everything was normal, mundane even, until it wasn't. The first sign that something was amiss came when I noticed a group of people gathered near the front windows. They were pointing and murmuring, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wheeled my cart over to see what the fuss was about. That's when I saw them. A sea of people, hundreds strong, flooding the parking lot. They carried signs, their voices a distant roar even through the thick glass of the storefront. I squinted to read the closest placard. Stop the Monsanto monopoly. Protesters. What's going on? I asked the elderly woman next to me, who was peering out with a mix of fascination and worry. She turned to me, her eyes wide behind thick-rimmed glasses. It's those anti-GMO folks. They've been threatening to do something big for weeks now. Before I could respond, a booming voice cut through the store. Attention Greenleaf shoppers. Due to an unexpected situation, we are temporarily locking down the store. Please remain calm and stay inside. We'll update you as soon as we have more information. A ripple of unease swept through the crowd by the window. People started backing away, some hurrying deeper into the store, as if distance from the windows could protect them from whatever was happening outside. I stood my ground, watching as the protesters drew closer to the building. Their chants became clearer. No more GMOs! No more GMOs! Suddenly, there was a loud bang against the glass, making everyone jump. A rotten tomato had been thrown, leaving a red smear on the window. More followed, a barrage of overripe produce splattering against the storefront. Everyone, step away from the windows. A security guard appeared, ushering us back. Please, for your safety, Move to the center of the store. As we retreated, I heard the distinct sound of the automatic doors being locked. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were trapped. The next hour was a blur of confusion and rising tension. People huddled in small groups, whispering theories and checking their phones for news. But cell service was spotty at best, likely overwhelmed by everyone trying to contact the outside world at once. I found myself in the bakery section, perched on an overturned milk crate next to the day-old bread rack. Around me, a mismatched group had formed. Karen, a yoga instructor with a cart full of kombucha and quinoa, Bob, a gruff construction worker who'd only popped in for a six-pack, and May, a college student who worked part-time at the store's juice bar. "This is ridiculous," Bob grumbled, cracking open one of his beers. "Don't these hippies have jobs?" Karen shot him a look. "They're standing up for what they believe in. GMOs are a serious issue." "Oh, here we go," Bob rolled his eyes. I tuned out their bickering, focusing instead on the store manager who was making his way through the aisles, talking in hushed tones with the security guards. His face was pale, forehead beaded with sweat. Whatever was happening, it was more serious than a simple protest. As if on cue, the store's PA system crackled to life. "Attention shoppers and staff, we've just received word from the protest organizers. They have demands." The store fell silent, everyone straining to hear. "They're insisting that we remove all products containing GMOs from our shelves. They say they won't let anyone leave until we comply." A beat of shocked silence. Then the store erupted in a cacophony of voices. Fear, anger, disbelief. The emotions were as varied as they were intense. "That's insane. Can they even do that? I have kids to pick up. What about my ice cream? It's melting." I caught May's eye, seeing my own worry reflected there. This was no longer a simple inconvenience. We were hostages, bargaining chips in someone else's fight. Hours crawled by. The initial panic gave way to a tense, restless waiting. People made makeshift beds out of bags of dog food and pool noodles. The deli staff distributed sandwiches and bottles of water. In any other circumstance, the sight of people picnicking in the cereal aisle might have been amusing. As night fell, the store took on an eerie quality. The harsh fluorescent lights cast long shadows, and the continued chants from outside created a constant, unsettling backdrop. I found myself wandering the aisles, unable to sit still. That's when I overheard a heated conversation between the store manager and a man I didn't recognize. Someone from corporate, I guessed. "We can't possibly remove every GMO product," the manager was saying, his voice strained. "Do you know how many items that would be? Practically everything with corn or soy." "I don't care if you have to empty half the damn store," the corporate guy snapped. "The PR nightmare if someone gets hurt, just do it." I retreated, mind racing. If they gave in to the protesters' demands, how long would it take? Would they really let us go, or would there be more demands? As I rounded the corner into the produce section, I quite literally ran into a solution. My cart collided with a display of organic kale, sending leafy greens cascading to the floor. As I bent to clean up the mess, an idea began to form. I grabbed a handful of kale and made my way to where Karen, Bob, and May were huddled. "Guys," I said, a little breathless with the excitement of my plan, "I think I know how we can end this." I laid out my idea. It was crazy, possibly dangerous, but as I spoke, I saw a spark of hope ignite in their eyes. An hour later, our plan was in motion. We'd recruited others, a retired chemistry teacher, a couple of enterprising teenagers, even the reluctant store manager. The produce section had been transformed into a covert operations center. Using the kale and other organic produce, we created a convincing facsimile of the store's inventory. Kale became stand-ins for spinach and lettuce. Beets masqueraded as tomatoes. With some creative labeling courtesy of the store's label maker, we had a veritable army of GMO-free products. As dawn broke, we put the final phase into action. The manager made an announcement over the PA system, declaring that we were complying with the protesters' demands. Under the watchful eyes of the security cameras, which we hoped the protesters were monitoring, we began removing GMO products and replacing them with our organic decoys. It was a tense few hours. Every time the automatic doors opened to allow another cart of GMO products out, I held my breath, certain we'd be found out. But amazingly, it worked. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the parking lot in shades of gold, we heard the news we'd been waiting for. The protesters, satisfied that their demands had been met, were dispersing. The cheer that went up when the doors were finally unlocked was deafening. People rushed out, blinking in the bright sunlight, hugging loved ones who'd been anxiously waiting. As I stepped outside, my legs wobbly from exhaustion and relief, I was hit with the absurdity of it all. We'd ended a hostage situation with Kale. If that wasn't a distinctly 21st century solution, I didn't know what was. In the days that followed, our story made headlines. Veggie Victory: How Organic Produce Saved the Day. There were interviews, think pieces, even talk of a movie deal. The supermarket chain, in a stroke of marketing genius, launched a Hero Kale promotion. But beyond the media circus, something more profound had occurred. In that store, faced with a common threat, strangers had become allies. We'd seen past our differences, the yoga instructor and the construction worker, the corporate suit and the college student, and worked together. As for me, well, I never did get that arugula for my wife's salad. But I gained something far more valuable, a reminder of the power of community, creativity, and a little bit of kale. Now, every time I pass the produce section, I can't help but smile. Who knew that in the midst of chaos, salvation could be so green,